They smiled for the cameras. They waved to the crowds. They delivered carefully crafted speeches, and yet, behind those rehearsed gestures, something was missing. Silence. Not just the silence of grief, but the silence of omission. The silence that hides secrets. August 31st, 1997. The world mourned the death of Princess Diana. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace. Thousands of flowers, candles, letters. The air was heavy with shock. But inside the royal walls, there was hesitation. 5 days passed before Queen Elizabeth made a public statement. 5 days of worldwide confusion, outrage, and unanswered questions. Why the delay? What was happening behind closed doors? An internal royal memo leaked years later would read, "The priority now is to protect the institution, not the family, not the sons, not the truth." Tonight, we dig deeper into what happened inside Buckingham Palace in the immediate aftermath of Diana's death. Strange reactions, tense meetings, rewritten speeches, deleted files, and a growing suspicion that perhaps the monarchy knew more than they ever said, knew something that made silence their safest weapon. This is not just about what was lost in Paris. It's about what was buried in London. If you believe there's more hidden behind the palace walls, hit like now. What comes next might disturb you even more than you expect. The silence is cracking. Let's begin. August 31st, 1997. The crash, the tunnel, the sirens, and then silence. As the sun rose over Paris, the world awoke to the impossible. Princess Diana was gone. The headlines broke like waves. Radios stuttered the news. Televisions across time zones replayed footage of a mangled black Mercedes and the terrible confirmation that shattered millions of hearts. Grief spread like wildfire. In London, mourners moved in slow, stunned silence. Strangers wept side by side. Shopkeepers closed their doors. Schools held vigils. The gates of Kensington Palace disappeared beneath a sea of flowers, growing by the hour. Notes, bears, candles, prayers. The world demanded answers. The world waited for the crown to speak. But Buckingham Palace said nothing. Not for a few hours. Not for a day. For 5 full days. 5 days of royal silence. And in that silence, something began to crack. Not inside the palace, but outside its gates. Confusion turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned to rage. News anchors asked what the public wouldn't. Where is the Queen? Why hasn't Charles addressed the nation? Why is the monarchy missing at this moment of crisis? Outside Balmoral, protesters gathered. "Say something," they shouted. "Show us you care." But the royal windows remained shuttered. The curtains stayed drawn, and inside the palace, leaked internal memos would later reveal a chilling shift in tone. One confidential document, eventually obtained by a journalist embedded in the royal press corps, outlined the palace's real concern in the hours following Diana's death. One line stood out in stark black ink. "The priority now is to preserve the institution, not protect the children, not honor the mother of the future king. Preserve the institution." Behind the gates, royal advisors scrambled. Every public gesture was debated, revised, rehearsed. The language of mourning was calculated like a political speech. Every pause, every tear, every silence, intentional. Prince Charles, silent. Prince Philip, silent. Queen Elizabeth, still in Balmoral, with William and Harry. The official reason? She was protecting her grandsons from the chaos in London. But not everyone believed it. Former palace staffers, under anonymity, claimed something far more deliberate. The royal family was using those 5 days not to grieve, but to strategize, to read the public, to test how far the monarchy could remain detached before it began to fracture. Some say multiple statements were drafted and destroyed. One speech was said to be too sterile, another too emotional, and then there was the third, too revealing. A royal speechwriter would later admit the first draft was flatly rejected. It wasn't about Diana, it was about survival. And finally, on September 5th, the Queen stood before the cameras. She wore black. Her tone was composed. She called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being. The public exhaled, but not everyone believed it came from the heart, because that final speech wasn't the Queen's voice. It was the voice of the monarchy, trying not to collapse. If you want to keep following the threads behind the curtain, subscribe now, because each clue leads deeper into a labyrinth of quiet decisions and deliberate omissions. But what if that silence was hiding a private deal made in the shadows? Let's pull the next thread. When tragedy struck in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the world froze. In a matter of hours, candlelight vigils emerged, headlines ignited, and a storm of mourning began to sweep across the globe. And as millions demanded answers, all eyes turned to one man, Prince Charles. The public expected a broken ex-husband, a grieving father, a royal figure humbled by unimaginable loss. But what they got was something else. Charles boarded a royal jet to Paris. With him was not just a team of aides, but Lord Robin Janvrin, the Queen's private secretary, one of the most powerful and discreet operatives inside the royal machinery. Officially, the mission was solemn and symbolic. The former husband traveling to retrieve the body of the mother of his sons. Unofficially, something else was unfolding. When Charles arrived at Pity-Salpêtrière Hospital, he didn't immediately see Diana's body. He didn't meet with nurses. He didn't break down as many expected. Instead, he was led into a closed-door meeting with hospital officials. It lasted nearly 2 hours. What was said behind those walls remains undisclosed to this day, but whispers have survived. Hospital staff later described Charles's demeanor as unnaturally composed, even clinical. According to a senior nurse who later spoke anonymously to the French press, he asked for the name of the attending surgeon before asking about Diana's condition. Another hospital administrator claimed that Charles was preoccupied with logistics, wanting to review the documentation for body transport, passport clearances, press coordination, and timeline control. One orderly who witnessed the exchange said bluntly, "It didn't feel like grief. It felt like damage control." Why? Why would Charles act more like a royal strategist than a bereaved ex-husband? Some royal defenders insist this was simply Charles's way of coping, shutting down emotionally under the weight of duty. But others, including members of the press who were in Paris that night, believe it was part of something larger. The presence of Lord Janvrin only deepens the mystery. This wasn't a ceremonial figure. Janvrin wasn't there for hand-holding or symbolism. He was the Queen's eyes and ears, dispatched in moments of crisis to manage messaging, optics, and containment. So, why was he sent? Was Charles acting on palace orders? Was this trip truly about retrieving Diana, or about seizing control of the narrative before it could escape the hospital walls? And, more importantly, why was no official record ever released about what happened in that meeting room? The French government has never released transcripts, and Buckingham Palace has never acknowledged the meeting in any public capacity. Everything that happened that night, from the timing of Charles's arrival, to the sequence of communications, to the secrecy of the negotiations, suggests this wasn't spontaneous grief. It was strategy. Do you think Charles knew something he never revealed? Share your theory below. Your voice matters in this investigation, because the coldness in Paris wasn't an isolated moment. His behavior wasn't the only one raising red flags. And next, we turn our attention to the woman at the center of the crown, the Queen. As the nation mourned, the Queen vanished. while television screens replayed images of Diana's last days, while crowds gathered by the millions outside royal gates. Queen Elizabeth II remained silent, tucked away in the Scottish Highlands at Balmoral Castle, with William and Harry by her side. The official explanation? She was protecting the boys. But not everyone was convinced. The public began asking, why didn't the Queen return to London? Why wasn't she visible in the nation's darkest hour? For nearly a week, she made no televised appearances, no public condolences, not even a statement. Royal commentators described the moment as one of the greatest crises of the monarchy in modern history. Newspapers, normally deferential to the crown, published searing headlines. Show us you care. Where is our queen? Inside the palace, it wasn't just chaos, it was calculation. According to sources close to the royal household, the Queen's advisors were not discussing how to honor Diana's legacy. They were discussing how to protect the monarchy's image. One insider later admitted that the Queen was deeply shaken, but not only by Diana's death. It was the public reaction that unnerved her. The outpouring of grief, the spontaneous shrines, the collective rage, all of it caught the monarchy off guard. And then there was the speech. On September 5th, 1997, Queen Elizabeth finally appeared on live television. Dressed in black, she delivered a solemn tribute to Diana, calling her an exceptional and gifted human being. The moment calmed public fury, but here's the part few know. That speech was rewritten 3 times. The first draft was reportedly rejected outright by her senior aides, deemed unacceptable in tone, too impersonal, too cold, possibly even dismissive. What did it say? No one outside the palace has ever seen it. Another draft followed, then another. The final version was measured, polished, but it wasn't the Queen's first voice. It was the monarchy's survival instinct, scripted to hold a nation together. And yet, some staffers claim there was tension in the room before that broadcast, that the Queen hesitated, that she struggled to reconcile the institution's image with personal emotion, because Diana, in life and in death, represented everything the monarchy couldn't control. If this revelation caught you off guard, hit like, because the palace's quiet crisis only gets darker from here. And what if someone inside the palace was documenting everything in secret? Let's turn the page and find out. Sometimes the truth doesn't echo from a throne. It whispers from the servants' quarters. Years after Diana's death, a former royal butler, once invisible to the public eye, released a memoir. At first glance, it seemed like another personal tale from a man who had simply polished the silver and served tea. But buried within its pages were notes, handwritten, dated, raw, fragments of thought, scribbled just days after Diana's death. And one line stopped readers cold. They knew, just not how the world would react. The author never clarified who they were. He didn't need to. The pages that followed painted a picture of a palace in panic, not from grief, but from exposure. According to these private entries, internal tension in the royal household escalated quickly in the wake of Diana's passing. There were whispers of blame and quiet fury behind the scenes. Certain royals reportedly accused others of not doing enough. Aides clashed over media control, public statements, and how to reposition the crown in the eyes of the nation. But the most disturbing quote in those diary pages came from an unnamed senior figure. She dug her own grave. We only had to step aside. What could that possibly mean? Had Diana's growing popularity, outspokenness, and global influence become a liability to those within the monarchy? Had her death been seen not as a tragedy, but as a release of pressure? The diary doesn't provide hard evidence. It's not a smoking gun, but what it offers is something equally powerful. A glimpse into a mindset, a coldness, a strategic detachment. That doesn't align with the public face of royal mourning. It suggests that inside the walls of power, Diana's death wasn't unexpected. It was inconvenient. And in those early days, before tributes were written, before flowers had wilted, there were deliberate discussions on how to steer the monarchy through the storm. Some said nothing. Others wrote it down. Subscribe now, because in the next segment, we'll reveal the name of a royal who allegedly tried to suppress a recording Diana never wanted the public to forget. And that recording might be the key to the whole story. We're getting closer. Let's keep going. We all remember the interview. 1995. BBC Panorama. Diana, seated in a dimly lit room, eyes unwavering as she delivered one of the most iconic lines in royal history. There were 3 of us in this marriage. The world was stunned, the monarchy shaken, and yet that interview, for all its impact, was only part of the story. What most people don't know is that Princess Diana recorded more than just one interview. In the years leading up to her death, she began documenting her thoughts, fears, and suspicions, not for a camera crew, but for Peter Settlein, her personal voice coach. At first, these recordings were intended to help her articulate with strength and clarity, but over time, they became something else entirely: confessionals. In these private sessions, Diana spoke openly, sometimes emotionally, sometimes in code, about the pressures she faced, the betrayals she endured, and the paranoia that grew around her. She talked about Charles, about Camilla, and about something far more unsettling: surveillance. She claimed her phone was being tapped, that she was being followed, that they were watching her. These tapes, according to insiders, were deeply personal, but they were also explosive, and then they vanished. After her death, the original recordings were allegedly taken by British authorities. Legal battles followed. For years, royal legal teams fought to keep the tapes sealed. They argued privacy, protection, protocol. But what were they really protecting? Why would the monarchy go to such lengths to keep a widow's voice from being heard? Eventually, some of the footage resurfaced. Fragments aired in documentaries, carefully edited, carefully framed. But many experts believe that the most sensitive sections have never been released. The parts where Diana names names. The parts where she explains why she feared for her life. According to one journalist who saw early transcripts, Diana once said, "If I disappear, look to the palace. Start there. Should the world hear the full truth, comment below. Release Diana's tapes. Your voice may be louder than you think, but what you'll hear next might be even more disturbing, because Diana didn't just leave recordings. She left something far more direct, a letter written for the only 2 people she ever truly trusted. After the black-clad crowds dispersed, after the flowers began to wilt outside Kensington Palace, after the cameras were turned off and the headlines faded, 2 boys, just 15 and 12 years old, were left with their grief: William and Harry. But what they received in the days following their mother's funeral may be the most haunting piece of Diana's legacy. A letter, allegedly written by Princess Diana and entrusted to her solicitor weeks before her death. The contents were simple and devastating. "If anything happens to me, search inside the palace. Not everyone there is your ally." The letter, according to sources close to the family, was never meant for the public. It was personal, protective, a final act of maternal instinct. The letter was passed to the boys, quietly, away from the press, away from the scrutiny, and for years, it disappeared into royal silence, until whispers began to surface. Royal insiders revealed that William kept the original, locked away in a private archive, guarded even from senior aides. But when Harry left the monarchy, cutting ties with the firm and moving to the United States, it's said he took a copy of that letter with him. Why? What was written between the lines? Some say the letter was longer than the version known today, that Diana detailed names, incidents, and her growing sense that an accident might be orchestrated. She had warned friends, she had written to butlers, she had spoken to her lawyer, but this note, to her sons, was different. It was final, and as time passed, the letter took on new meaning, especially as Harry began to speak out about royal cruelty, about silence, about secrets. Was it the letter that finally gave him the courage to walk away? Was it a warning that shaped his escape? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, has William stayed quiet to protect the crown? Subscribe now, because in the next episode, we'll connect this secret message to one of the biggest scandals the monarchy has faced in decades. We are no longer dealing with speculation, because now we're entering dangerous territory. The cover-up. Let's go deeper. By now, the pieces are forming a disturbing pattern. The silence from the monarchy, the cold logistics of Charles's trip, the Queen's rewritten speech, the servant's hidden diary, the forbidden recordings, the secret letter left for two sons. Individually, they might appear as scattered fragments of a royal tragedy. But when we connect them, the picture that emerges is far more sinister and far more deliberate. What if this wasn't just a moment of chaos? What if it was strategy? Some investigators believe the days following Diana's death weren't marked by confusion, but by precision. That every royal reaction, or lack of one, was part of a control mechanism activated in real time. And here's where it gets darker. Certain surveillance footage from the Paris tunnel that night, still classified. Witnesses who came forward with contradictory details, some of them later recanted. Others vanished from the press entirely. Phone records deleted. Royal correspondences from that week sealed under royal privilege for decades. And there's more. According to a former intelligence liaison, there exists a list, unofficial, never confirmed, of names connected to Operation Paget, the official investigation into Diana's death. Most are public figures, but a few are not. Their roles, unknown. Their ties, protected. And no one in the British press dares to say them out loud. Even members of Parliament, when questioned on certain aspects of the case, have dodged answers. Some refer to national security concerns. Others claim insufficient evidence. But what if the absence of evidence is the plan? Could the monarchy have initiated a silent operation to preserve itself? No matter the emotional cost, could Diana's death have triggered a chain reaction of cover-ups that continues to this day? And if that's true, what else are they hiding? Click the video on your screen now. It's time to uncover the darkest chapter in royal history, because next, we expose the machinery behind the greatest royal cover-up of our time. And once you see it, you can never unsee it.